The 7 most important paintings by Paul Gauguin.
Number 7. Arearea, 1892. During his second stay in Tahiti, Paul Gauguin conceived Arearea, a manifesto of his idealized vision of Polynesian life, freed from the shackles of industrial progress. This painting captures a moment of serenity in a world that the artist imagined still unchanged, where the harmony between humanity and nature remains intact. The composition stands out for its structure on different planes. In the foreground, 2 women dressed in colorful sarongs converse in a relaxed manner, while a red dog occupies the center of the image, defying the chromatic conventions of the time. Beyond, a procession of figures enters a green space, as if responding to a mystical call, suggesting a worldview in which the earthly and the divine are intertwined. In this work, Gauguin displays a refined technique based on the use of oil on canvas with intense colors, applied in solid planes and delimited with marked lines, evoking the aesthetics of primitive art. The chromatic saturation gives a dreamlike atmosphere to the scene, in which the symbolism of the dog and the arrangement of the characters refer to a latent spiritual universe. Arearea is in the Musée d'Orsay, in Paris, where his influence on the avant-garde movements of the 20th century was decisive, serving as a reference for movements such as Fauvism, which found in his colors a source of visceral and emotional expression. Number 6. Tahitian Women on the Beach, 1891. Newly arrived in Tahiti, Paul Gauguin captured in Tahitian women on the beach a moment of contemplative calm, far from the hustle and bustle of Western life. This work, which marks the beginning of his immersion in Polynesian exoticism, portrays 2 young women sitting on the sand, lost in thoughts that seem alien to the viewer's presence. With a gaze that oscillates between melancholy and introspection, the women represent the dichotomy between the placidity of island existence and the latent tension caused by European colonization. The background, defined by the line of the sea and a calm horizon, accentuates the sensation of stillness and absorption, giving the scene an aura of mystery. Oil on canvas allowed Gauguin to experiment with a technique in which the simplification of forms and the juxtaposition of flat colors replaced traditional modeling. The color range, dominated by ochres and blues, gives the work a serene character, while the economy of elements reinforces its meditative quality. Tahitian Women on the Beach is now part of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay, where it stands as a testimony to the artist's transition towards his definitive pictorial language. Its aesthetic has notably influenced artists such as Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse, who saw in Gauguin's work a way to renew modern art through simplification and expressiveness of color. Number 5. When Will You Get Married? Nafia Faa Poipo, 1892. At a time when the Western gaze idealized the exotic, Paul Gauguin arrived in Tahiti with the ambition of capturing a reality still unexplored by European painting. When Will You Get Married? Is a testament to his fascination with a world that, in his perception, had not yet been corrupted by modernity. In this work, the artist presents 2 female figures, one in a contemplative position and the other with an inquisitive gesture that questions the viewer, embodying the clash between tradition and change. The painting is not only a reflection of his experience on the island, but also a work that, over time, would become one of the most coveted on the art market. The oil on canvas is defined by its vibrant palette and bold use of color, a hallmark of Post-Impressionism that Gauguin took to its fullest expression. The superposition of flat tones and the absence of mottled shadows reinforce the sense of timelessness and evoke the influence of Japanese art on his work. Beyond the technique, the scene contains a profound symbolic charge. The gesture of the young woman dressed in pink alludes to the tradition of arranged marriages in Tahitian culture, while the presence of the other figure, with her melancholic gaze, seems to embody uncertainty about the future. Today, the work has been part of private collections and prestigious museums, consolidating itself as an icon of modern art. Its influence extends to generations of artists who found in Gauguin's color and formal simplification an inexhaustible source of aesthetic exploration. Number 4. The Spirit of the Dead Watches. 1892. Paul Gauguin's contact with the Tahitian worldview marked a fundamental turning point in his artistic production, evidenced in The Spirit of the Dead Watching. The work was born in a context of anxiety and fascination when, according to the painter's own accounts, he found his young wife, Tahamana, motionless and terrified in the darkness of her room. Inspired by this scene, he transferred to the canvas a vision that oscillates between reality and dreamlike, evoking an atmosphere of mysticism rooted in local beliefs about the presence of spirits. The work is a testament to his desire to capture not only the daily life of the island, but also its myths and superstitions. The composition stands out for its treatment of color, where the contrasts between yellow and violet create a feeling of unease, intensified by the tense posture of the female figure. The dense brushwork and the use of flat tones refer to the formal simplification that characterized his style, emphasizing the two-dimensionality of space. The specter that rises behind the young woman, dressed in a dark sarong, is a symbol of death in Polynesian tradition, although its interpretation remains open to multiple readings. Exhibited in important museums throughout the 20th century, the work consolidated the exploration of the supernatural in modern art, and its influence can be seen in the symbolism of artists such as Edvard Munch and Emil Nolde, who took fear and anguish to new pictorial dimensions. Number 3. The Yellow Christ. 1889. At the heart of Paul Gauguin's religious symbolism, the Yellow Christ emerges as one of his most enigmatic and personal creations. Inspired by a carved wooden crucifix he found in the Breton region of Pont-Aven, the artist transfigured the traditional image of Christ into an icon of modernity, linked to popular spirituality and beliefs rooted in the folklore of the area. In this reinterpretation, the figure of Jesus is removed from suffering to acquire a static and almost mystical presence, where the intensity of color replaces the drama of expression. The choice of yellow, with its golden and luminous tone, not only reinforces the idea of divinity, but also connects the work with the symbolism of color in Gauguin's thought. By applying a technique of thick contours and flat colors, the painter breaks away from naturalistic representation to create a scene that borders on the visionary. The Breton peasant women surrounding the cross seem indifferent to the sacrifice, as if they perceived it not as a historical fact, but as a constant presence in their daily lives. Currently housed in the Albright Knox Art Gallery, the work had a notable impact on Expressionism, influencing the way in which Christian iconography was reinterpreted by avant-garde artists in the 20th century. Number 2. Vision After the Sermon. Jacob Wrestling with the Angel. 1888. The impact of Paul Gauguin's stay in Breton on his work is powerfully condensed in Vision After the Sermon, a piece in which the fusion of the real and the spiritual breaks with the traditional canons of Western painting. Inspired by the rustic devotion of the peasants of Pont-Aven, Gauguin captures the moment when the women, fresh from church, project their faith into a mystical vision. The composition, radical in its use of color and in its separation between the earthly and transcendental planes, is an affirmation of the artist's symbolist quest. The work moves away from the prevailing naturalism and gives way to a universe where the perception of the world is filtered by the subjectivity of the spirit. Technically, the painting is a bold exploration of flat, arbitrary colors, with a deep red dominating the scene and stripping the landscape of any pretense of realism. The influence of Japanese printmaking is evident in the arrangement of elements and the absence of traditional perspective, which underlines the two-dimensionality of the canvas. The struggle of Jacob and the angel, depicted in the upper corner, is more than a biblical scene. It is the inner conflict between the mundane and the divine, a struggle that the viewer witnesses from a distance. The work is currently in the National Gallery of Art, New York, USA. Gallery of Scotland, where it stands as a milestone of post-impressionism. Its bold use of color and formal simplification would influence the Nabi generation and artists such as Matisse, who found in its symbolism a key to free painting from the shackles of visual mimesis. Number 1. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? 1897. Paul Gauguin's greatest work is, without a doubt, Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? A pictorial testament in which the artist expresses his philosophical vision in a visual narrative of disturbing depth. Painted in Tahiti, where Gauguin sought refuge from the Western world, the scene unfolds in a panoramic format that imitates an archaic frieze, proposing a reading from left to right as the inevitable transition of existence. This work was conceived in a state of anguish, when the artist was facing personal and economic crises, and he considered it his last great declaration before attempting to take his own life. The composition, structured in different episodes of human life, is a meditation on the transience and mystery of existence, in which nature and the human figure merge in a dreamlike setting. The color palette, dominated by ochre and blue tones, refers to the warmth of the Tahitian land and the introspective spirit of the work. Gauguin dispenses with traditional perspective to create a sense of timelessness, in which the characters seem to exist in a simultaneous and absolute space. Symbolism is found in every gesture and object. The child figure refers to birth, while the bent old woman alludes to the inevitability of death. The painting, currently housed in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, is one of the most enigmatic of post-impressionism and has been a reference for 20th-century artists such as Picasso and Kandinsky, who found in its symbolic charge and in its treatment of color a bridge to abstraction and modern art. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.